Holocaust, mankind at its worst. Many people think it was the most inhumane time in our history. Books, videos, and thousands of articles have been created to inform us of this tragic time in history. And although they give us a lot of information, to really understand what happened, we need to see and feel what these poor, innocent people had to experience. That is the purpose of this documentary, to give you the full experience of being a Jew in 1942. We will now take you back in time so that you can see what life was like for a Jew sent to Auschwitz. We will begin with the long train ride taking you to Auschwitz. From cities all over Europe, Jews were forced from their homes and were herded up and squeezed into cattle cars to go to Auschwitz. Deportation to the camps often took days. The people had no idea where they were going, no idea how long it would take, and no idea what would happen when they got there. The conditions in the cars were absolutely horrible. Many times they were forced to stand and were given very little to eat or drink. Water buckets were thrown into the car for prisoners to use for human waste. Many people became ill and died on the way to the camp. When the prisoners arrived at Auschwitz, they were separated into two lines. One was for the unable and the other for the able. The prisoners deemed unfit for work were put in a line to be gassed. The gas chambers were where they sent prisoners to die. They disguised the gas chambers as showers, and once the prisoners were inside, they exposed them to Zyklon B gases, which killed them. Because of their tragic end, some might think that the other line was far better. In reality, the people that were fit for work didn't have it much better. The ones fit for work were tattooed, got their heads shaved, and were stripped of their clothes and given work clothes. Throughout their stay, they worked long, hard hours and were given little food. The terrible cruelty to the Jews is very evident in the living conditions at Auschwitz. The prisoners lived in overcrowded barracks. Some of the barracks were so overcrowded that prisoners could only sleep on their sides. The conditions were extremely unsanitary. The barracks had leaky roofs, dampness, and foul straw because the prisoners had limited bathrooms. As a result, the prisoners often suffered from diarrhea and other diseases. There were rats and other vermin in the barracks. Prisoners also received very little food, with an average calorie intake of 1,300 to 1,700 calories a day. Since they were receiving very little food and working hard, their bodies deteriorated and they often died of starvation. The prisoners spent over 10 hours a day working, and the rest of the time was wasted on roll call and waiting in line for food. These living conditions were disastrous and resulted in many deaths. Another horrible treatment the prisoners experienced was medical experimentation. Some of the horrible experiments they performed were genetic experimentation, organ removal, eye injections, injections into the bloodstream, and wounds inflicted into the skin similar to the ones soldiers might get. These poor humans were treated worse than laboratory animals are today. The tragedies of Auschwitz ended in January 1945, when the Soviets, part of the Allied troops, liberated the concentration camp. The Soviets found piles of unburied corpses and about 6,000 starving prisoners. There was such a low number of prisoners found because when the Nazis realized troops were coming, they forced nearly 60,000 prisoners to begin marching to the west. This march became known as the Death March because so many prisoners died. In the next few months, the British and American forces liberated other concentration camps. Susan Pollock tells us about the Death March and how she almost didn't survive it. I vaguely recall the Death March to Bergen-Belsen. I was so weak by then. The conditions were appalling and they put us in barracks. I remember crawling out of it because by that time I was too weak to walk. But I couldn't bear to stay among the corpses any longer. And bumping into a neighbor who was as surprised to see me as I was her. They brought little ambulances in and drove around picking us up. I was trembling and virtually lifeless, lying near the barracks, the stench of corpses everywhere, and unable to walk or lift myself when they arrived with the little ambulance. I don't think I was able to talk to the soldiers who approached me. My comprehension had long gone, but I remember the gentleness in him. We couldn't eat, and I remember fainting when I tried to get out of bed. Gradually, they administered the food, but I didn't trust anyone, and I hid the food in my bed, afraid that they would suddenly take it away. This was the end of one of the most tragic times in history. The happenings and events of Auschwitz and the Holocaust show mankind at its worst. Yet even in the midst of the tragedy, we see the goodness of people. There were prisoners who helped other prisoners survive, and Allied forces who risked their lives to save people they didn't even know. Hopefully, history will never see another Holocaust.